It looks like we're live.
We are live. Lights, camera, action. Okay, go Adam. I'm just kidding. We're going to give everybody a second to go ahead and log on here. Everybody should have just gotten the notification. And I know some are going to listen live. Others are going to wait until it's over, whenever they have more time, which is awesome as well. So we'll just give everybody a few seconds. Just so everybody knows, Adam and I both have put gel in our hair to honor Nikolai Carpathia from the Left Behind series, who was portrayed as the Antichrist, the Beast, the Man of Sin, all that stuff. And yeah, I just looked up a picture of him, and he looked pretty anti-Christy for sure. So yeah, it looks like we got some people jumping on. Hello guys, how are you?
Hello.
Really glad to have everybody tonight. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that, Jordan, you have hair long enough that you could kind of put 10 spikes in there to represent the 10 horns of the beast. My hair, unfortunately, is too short for that. I think you could pull it off.
Yeah, you know what's crazy is I actually did that. Whenever I was in like the 7th grade, I took Elmer's glue and I went through my hair and did about 15 individual spikes, and I thought I was the coolest thing, but everybody made fun of me and I wasn't cool. So awesome. Hello, James Peterson. Thanks for joining on. If anybody wants to comment during this teaching, maybe you just had a comment on the teaching or just want to say, hey, where you're watching from, give us your city and state, then I will show it
or
on
country.
The screen. Or country, like James Peterson says hello. So
yeah. Hello, James.
Hello, James. Isn't this awesome? I love this BeLive.tv. It's really neat. Elizabeth Kane. Hello, Elizabeth. Thank you, Elizabeth, for helping spreading the word for this call. I know that she tagged several people to spread the word about this call. So thank you, Elizabeth. You are a true blessing. All right, everybody. So we're going to go ahead and get this rolling. And Gary DeMar, who is, I would say, my favorite author of Bible prophecy. If you haven't read the book Last Days Madness, get it. It literally deals with every subject that you could possibly imagine related to Bible prophecy. It's like a handbook. It's like this thick, and it's very easy to read, but yet it's very profound truth. He's also written a book that kind of gives a response to the Left Behind series called Left Behind: Separating Fact or Fiction. I highly recommend that book. But he's written lots of great books. But he commented and he said, hey, your message is called Who is the Beast of Revelation? And there's actually 2 beasts mentioned in Revelation. Now, I'm not claiming to be Mr. Understands Revelation guy. That would be Adam, which is I don't know how you're seeing this on the screen. That guy, the smarter guy with the glasses. And but so actually we changed the name to Who are the beast, plural, of Revelation, because there are 2. And Adam is actually going to talk about that on his 5th point. But without further ado, guys, once again, thank you for calling in. I understand it's difficult to dedicate time to this. You've got families, you've got stuff going on. You won't be disappointed. Adam has studied this and studied this and studied this. And the conclusion that he's actually going to present is actually, he's going to share this. It's actually one that he arrived at about the last year. Prior to that, he was more thinking that the beast was Nero, which is what I currently hold to. So all you people that currently believe the beast is Nero, you're not alone, just so you know. But Adam has realized that that particular understanding may be contradictory to a few very critical details that are presented in the book of Revelation and in history. So let's hear him out. He's studied the book of Revelation and written about it extensively. You can go to adammaarschalk.com and see that for proof. this guy knows his stuff, and it's worth hearing out and deeply considering. So expect to be inspired, expect to be driven to pursue truth for yourself. That's the ultimate thing, is don't take his word, don't take my word for it, study this stuff out. Adam, go ahead and take it away, man. We're really excited about this.
All right. Thank you, Jordan. And yes, please study it out for yourself. I know a lot about Revelation, more than I knew years ago, but I still have a lot to learn. And I think we all do. But I appreciate the introduction. And the topic that I'm going to discuss today, we know it's about the beast, but this topic appears in 8 out of the 22 chapters in the book of Revelation. There's more space given to this topic than to the harlot, the 2 witnesses, the New Jerusalem, etc. So this is a very key part of what John wanted to communicate to his first century readers. In John's day, there were very heavy consequences for those who followed the beast, but there were also great blessings for those who were to overcome the beast. And we really see this contrast in Revelation 14 and 15, where one group received the full strength of God's wrath and fiery torment, but the other group had the privilege of standing on the sea of glass and singing the Song of Moses and the Song of the Lamb. I'll read those 2 texts. The first text is Revelation 14, 9 through 11. Then a third angel followed, saying with a loud voice, "If anyone worships the beast and his image, and receives his mark on his forehead or on his hand, he himself will also drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out full strength into the cup of his indignation. And he will be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment ascends forever and ever. And they have no rest day or night, who worship the beast in his image, and whoever receives the mark of his name." In contrast, I saw something like a sea of glass mingled with fire, and those who have the victory over the beast, over his image, and over his mark, and over the number of his name, standing on the sea of glass, having harps of God. And they sing the song of Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb, saying, "Great and marvelous are your works, Lord God Almighty. Just and true are your ways, O King of the saints. Who will not fear you, O Lord, and glorify your name? For you alone are holy, for all nations shall come and worship before you, for your judgments have been manifested." So there's no doubt that the beast was a great enemy to the church. But who was this enemy? Was this enemy Roman, or was it Jewish, or was it something else? Whoever and whatever it was, there are details about the beast in Daniel 7, in Revelation 11, 13 through 17, and also chapters 19 and 20, which need to be reconciled. These details include 10 horns on the beast, a little horn coming up among the 10 horns, 3 horns that fell before the little horn persecuting the saints for 3.5 years, and also changing time and law. There was a second beast, as Jordan mentioned, that works very closely with the first beast. The beast had 7 heads. One of the heads was wounded. The dragon, beast, and false prophet worked together to gather people to a great battle. And the beast and the false prophet were cast into the lake of fire. I won't be covering all of these details in this presentation, but this is a research project I've been working on, as Jordan said, within the last year, maybe 8 months. And in my studies over these 7-8 months or so, I've learned a lot and come to some very different conclusions than what I used to believe about the beast. I became a preterist, or a believer in fulfilled eschatology, back in 2009. And I believed at that time that the beast was generally, that I did have some unanswered questions, especially when it came to Daniel 7 and also Revelation 19. But I kept those questions on the back burner. And when I finally brought them front and center and started dealing with them, I came to realize, personally, that Roman Nero did not fit the visions that Daniel and John had about a beast that would oppose God's people. On my blog, which is adammaarschalk.com, I've been putting together a series on this subject, moving chronologically from Daniel 2 to Daniel 7 and on through the book of Revelation. So in this presentation, though, I just want to highlight a few certain pieces of evidence which I believe show that the beast was not Rome, but actually Israel, the kingdom of Israel, not just a nation, but a kingdom. And in particular, the Zealot movement in Israel, which captured the loyalty of so many Jews in the first century. In saying this, I've come to believe that the beast of Revelation was not about emperor worship or persecuting those who wouldn't worship the emperor Nero. Instead, I believe it was about extreme nationalism, idolizing and worshiping the kingdom of Israel, persecuting and killing those who wouldn't go along with the war agenda of the Zealots and the Sicarii. It was also a strong rejection of Jesus' message that his kingdom is not of this world. It was a strong rejection of the Prince of Peace and Jesus' call for us to be peacemakers. There was a clinging to Mount Sinai, the Jerusalem below, and the kingdom that could be shaken, instead of embracing Mount Zion, the Jerusalem from above, and the kingdom that cannot be shaken. And here I'm referring to Galatians 4:21 through 31 and Hebrews 12:18 to 29. So in this presentation, we will analyze or look at 5 passages in Revelation in an effort to understand who was the beast. And Jordan's going to put these up individually as I come to them, but number 1 will be the 5th bowl was poured out on the beast, and this is Revelation 16:10 to 11. Number 2 will be the point that the beast was given to the burning flame, according to Daniel 7:11 and Revelation 19:20. The 3rd point will be who was killed by the sword and went into captivity, according to Revelation 13:10. The 4th point will be who destroyed and burned the harlot, according to Revelation 17:16. Other clues in that text, and also the historical records of Josephus. And point number 5 will be how did the 2 beasts relate to, quote, those who dwell on the earth, unquote, a phrase that is mentioned numerous times in Revelation chapter 13, verses 3 through 15. All right, so I'll get into point number 1. The 5th bowl was poured out on the beast, looking at Revelation 16:10 through 11. So this is the 5th bowl judgment, and here's what these 2 verses say in describing the pouring out of the 5th bowl. Then the 5th angel poured out his bowl on the throne of the beast, and his kingdom became full of darkness, and they gnawed their tongues because of the pain, and they blasphemed the God of heaven because of their pain and their sores, and did not repent of their deeds. So let's notice carefully that this bowl was to be poured out on the beast's throne and kingdom. I want us to consider this fact in light of an observation that a number of preterist teachers and websites have rightfully made. And that is the observation that the 7 seals, the 7 trumpets, and the 7 bowls were opened, sounded, and poured out on 1st century Israel, Judea, Samaria, Galilee, Idumea, Perea, etc. For example, Kenneth Gentry in his Gundry and C. Marvin Pate, he said this: John turns his attention to further judgments on the land of Israel by means of the 3 woes and the 7 bowls. As many know, Kenneth Gentry is famous for his books and DVDs which teach that the beast was Rome and Nero. And I don't mean any disrespect to him. He's done some great work. But he does contradict himself here when he says that, number 1, all 7 bowl judgments were for Israel, and number 2, Rome was the beast. But yet Revelation 16:10 says that the 5th bowl was to be poured out on the beast. And still inconsistent on another point. We'll see. But there are several reasons why it's valid to say that Israel was the target of these 7 bowls, trumpets, and seals. including the fifth bowl. I'll list two of these reasons. Concerning the seven bowls, the first verse of Revelation 16 shows that their target is the earth, otherwise translated as the land. That is the land of Israel. And if you were able to download the handout that I posted earlier, on page 2, there's some illustrations on that point. But here's what verse 1 says. Then I heard a loud voice from the temple saying to the seven angels, "Go and pour out the bowls of the wrath of God on the earth," or on the land. So there was a specific land that all seven bowls would be poured out upon, and that land was Israel. Also in Leviticus 26:18 through 28, God repeatedly warned Israel that there would come a time when they would be punished 7 times for their sins, as God would execute the vengeance of his covenant, verse 25. So it's no coincidence that the covenant imagery of Mount Sinai in Exodus 19 appears at the opening of the 7th seal, the sounding of the 7th trumpet, and the pouring out of the 7th bowl. So those sevenfold judgments of Leviticus 26 were to be reserved for Israel alone. They weren't for Rome, but for Israel. And it follows then that the 5th bowl judgment was poured out on the throne of the beast. It was Israel, not Rome, which experienced that darkness and pain. It was Israel that represented the kingdom of the beast. If the 5th bowl was poured out on Rome, then the bowls were only a 6-fold judgment on Israel and a 1-fold judgment on Rome. But that's not the case. Leviticus 26 was completely, not partially fulfilled. I'm seeing a couple of comments that the audio is a little bit choppy. Hopefully it gets better. Now in Revelation 16:11, which continues the description of the 5th bowl, it mentions pains and sores. It's good for us to consider whether that description fit the Roman Empire or Israel during the Jewish-Roman War. Did people in the Roman Empire experience pains and sores, or did this happen to the people of Israel? I think when we read Josephus' description of all the civil war, famine conditions, and dead bodies lying unburied, it's very easy to imagine that the pains and the sores were characteristic of Israel during that time, especially in Jerusalem. Okay, I'm going to move on now to point number 2, which is that the beast was given to the burning flame. And this is looking at Daniel 7:11 and Revelation 19:20. Here's what Daniel 7:11 says. I watched till the beast was slain, and its body destroyed and given to the burning flame. Now here is what Revelation 19:20 says. Then the beast was captured, and with him the false prophet who worked signs in his presence, by which he deceived those who received the mark of the beast and those who worshipped his image. These 2 were cast alive into the lake of fire, burning with brimstone. So here's the question. If the Roman Empire was the beast of Revelation, how was this empire captured, slain, destroyed, burned, and cast into the lake of fire? Rome actually came out of the Jewish-Roman War stronger than it was before the war. History tells us that the 2nd century AD was the strongest century for the Roman Empire. Now, if we think about the beast in the individual sense, many point to Nero. Was he killed, captured, burned, buried? No. He was killed with his own sword, but he was not captured or burned. And so that doesn't all fit. It was Israel, though, that was captured, destroyed, and burned, as we can see in great detail in Wars of the Jews by Josephus. Also, in the next verse, Revelation 19:21, if we look at that carefully, it suggests that the birds feasted on the flesh of the followers of the beast. So not only was the beast cast into the lake of fire with the false prophet, but also his followers had their flesh consumed by the birds. Did that happen to the followers of Nero or the Roman Empire, or did it happen to the people who followed the zealots who were leading Israel at the time? It did. It was the zealots in Israel. Okay, I'd like to now move on to point number 3, which is who was killed by the sword and went into captivity. And this is Revelation 13:10. Which is who was killed by the sword and went into captivity. So this is a related note to the last point. But in Revelation 13:10, we see a prophecy about the ultimate fate of the beast. And this prophecy was to be a comfort to those who were under persecution. And here John writes, Revelation 13:10, he who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He who kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. Now, there were certainly some Romans who were killed in the Jewish-Roman War, but the end result was most definitely victory for Rome and mass casualties instead for Israel and the zealots and the pilgrims who had come to Jerusalem from many nations but got trapped in the city when the siege began in April of AD 70. Now, this phrase, he who leads into captivity shall go into captivity, is significant. We know that the Romans took people captive, but the question is, were they themselves taken captive? No, they were not. The Jewish zealots took people captive, especially their fellow Jews who wouldn't go along with their war agenda. Were the zealots themselves taken? To point out a couple of examples, the zealot leader John Levi of Gischala, and also another zealot leader, Simon Bar Giora, who was called the General by the Romans. They were both taken captive by the Romans in August or September of AD 70, and both were paraded all the way to the city of Rome and humiliated. John was sentenced to life in prison, and Simon was executed as the general of the revolt. And most of the other zealot leaders were also executed by the Romans. So they were taken captive. The Romans were not. And now I'd like to move on to point 4, which I'll spend more time on points 4 and 5 than I did on the last 3 points. But point 4 is the question, who destroyed and burned the harlot? And this is looking especially at Revelation 17:16. And this verse, Revelation 16:10, predicted what the 10 horns of the beast would do to the harlot. That's a typo. Anyway, Revelation 17:16, I'm sorry. It says, the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, these will hate the harlot, make her desolate and naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. So I imagine that all or most of us here in this audience agree that the harlot was the city of Jerusalem. And the harlot was also called the great city in Revelation 17:18. But it was first mentioned, the great city was first mentioned in Revelation 11:8 and said to be the place where our Lord was crucified. This is review for most of us, which is evidence that the harlot was Jerusalem, where Jesus was crucified. So let's consider how the writings of Josephus answer 3 questions. Number 1, who made Jerusalem desolate? Number 2, who ate her flesh? And number 3, who burned the harlot with fire? Was it Rome or was it the zealots? And Josephus actually addressed all 3 of these questions repeatedly. For example, in Wars of the Jews, Book 5, Chapter 1, Section 1 and Section 5, Josephus said that when the zealots attacked the people of Jerusalem in February and March of AD 68, this was the beginning of the city's destruction. At that time, he said that the zealots were like a wild beast grown mad that was eating its own flesh and tearing the city into pieces. He's really using the language that John used right here in Revelation 17. Here's the quote. As to the attack that the zealots made upon the people, which I esteem the beginning of the city's destruction, it hath been already explained after an accurate manner. Let me skip a little bit here. For the present sedition, one should not mistake if he called it a sedition begotten or born by another sedition, and to be like a wild beast grown mad, which for desire of food from abroad fell now upon eating its own flesh. And now as the city was engaged in a war on all sides, from these treacherous crowds of wicked men, the people of the city between them were like a great body torn in pieces. And to add on to this, in Wars of the Jews, Book 5, Chapter 6, Section 1, Josephus made the point that the Romans showed more kindness to Jerusalem than the zealots of Israel did. He said, "For they never suffered anything that was worse from the Romans than they made each other suffer, nor was there any misery endured by the city after these men's actions that could be esteemed new. But it was most of all unhappy before it was overthrown, while those that took the city, meaning the Romans, did Jerusalem a greater kindness, for I venture to affirm that the sedition destroyed the city, and the Romans destroyed that sedition, which it was a much harder thing to do than to destroy the walls. So we may justly ascribe our misfortunes to our own people." Now let's consider the question about fire. We've seen that Josephus laid the blame upon the zealots for Jerusalem's destruction, and also said that the zealots consumed Jerusalem like a beast eating its own flesh. What about Jerusalem being burned with fire? In Wars of the Jews 5.4.4, Josephus described how a number of key buildings in Jerusalem were burned and destroyed at the beginning of the revolt by the robbers and the internal plotters, which are phrases meaning the Sicarii and the Zealots. He said, "It is not possible to give a complete description of these palaces in Jerusalem, and the very remembrance of them brings torment, as putting one in mind the vastly rich buildings that fire which was kindled by the robbers, meaning the Zealots, has consumed. These were not burnt by the Romans, but by these internal plotters, meaning the Zealots." And he goes on and specifies which glorious buildings were burned by the Zealots, not the Romans. Also, before Titus began the siege of Jerusalem in April of AD 70, Josephus also pointed out that John Levi and Simon Bar Giora, two main Zealot leaders, chose to burn down all the places around the temple. Let me just select part of this quote. This is in Wars 5.1.4. He said, "It came to pass that all the places that were round about the temple were burnt down and were become an intermediate desert space, ready for fighting on both sides of it, and that almost all the corn was burnt, which would have been sufficient for a siege of many years." And he says that it was like the Zealots did it on purpose to serve the Romans by destroying what the city had laid up to help them in the siege, and they cut off the nerves of their own power. Moving on to another quote, Wars of the Jews 4.6.3, Josephus said that these zealots occasioned the fulfilling of the negative prophecies that belonged to their country. And he goes on and cites an ancient oracle that the city of Jerusalem would be taken and the sanctuary would be burnt. And he goes on, I'm skipping part of the quote here, but it's in 4.6.3 of Wars of the Jews. He goes on and says, "They, the zealots, made themselves the instruments of the accomplishment of this prophecy." That is, taking the city and the sanctuary being burnt. He blames it not on the Romans, but the Jews. And to confirm this, Titus, when he gave a speech when he came to siege the city in AD 70, he says, "When I came near your temple, I again departed from the laws of war, and I exhorted you to spare your own sanctuary and to preserve your holy house for yourselves. I allowed you a quiet exit out of it in security for your preservation. If you had a mind, I gave you leave to fight in another place. Yet you, have still despised every one of my proposals, and have set fire to your holy house with your own hands. He said this in Wars 6.6.2. And in Wars 6.2.9, he says that the Jews set the northwest cloister joined to the Tower of Antonia on fire, and thereby made a beginning in burning the sanctuary. So the fire was started by the zealots. And then he goes on and says, even when it was in their power to have stopped the fire, instead, the Jews, still while the temple was first set on fire, deemed this spreading of the fire to be for their own advantage. Now, as you may or may not be aware, in August of AD 70, when the temple was set on fire, a couple days later, after being on fire for a couple days, a Roman soldier did set fire to a window of the temple, which ultimately led to the temple burning to the ground. Again, according to Josephus, the fire had already been burning for a while. Not only was it started by the Jews, but spread by the Jews, and they prevented the Romans from putting it out. And now a Roman soldier cast a burning ember up into a window where it caught fire and spread out of control. I won't read that quote, but that is in Wars 6.4.5, where he describes the actions of this Roman soldier. Okay, now I plan to post some written notes along with this presentation later, and I will address the 10 horns more in my written notes than I will right now. But since they are part of the subject here, I'll just say a couple of things. How do we identify the 10 horns that John said would hate the harlot and destroy them? The harlot. Well, among those who say that the beast was Rome, including myself not too long ago, I've generally seen the explanation that the 10 horns were not the spikes on Jordan's head, but that they were the 10 senatorial provinces of the Roman Empire. As far as I'm aware, though, neither Josephus nor the Roman historians of that time, like Tacitus or Suetonius or Dio Cassius, I see more than 10 there, Jordan. None of these historians ever said that the 10 provinces assisted Titus in the siege of Jerusalem. Instead, Titus came with 4 legions, and that's according to Wars of the Jews 5.1.6. And they came mostly from the province of Syria, which was a small part of the empire. Real quickly, though, my proposal about the 10 horns, at least in the beginning, because they are mentioned in both Daniel 7 and Revelation 17, I want to propose that they were 10 generals who were appointed to lead the war effort, and this happened in December of AD 66, according to Wars of the Jews, Book 2, Chapter 20, Sections 3 and 4. And the decision to put the war effort into these 10 generals' hands was made after the Jews achieved a very shocking victory over Cestius Gallus from Syria in late November of AD 66. What happened was that the Jews only lost a few men in this short battle, which lasted for a few days, but they killed nearly 5,800 Romans. You can see that in Wars of the Jews, Book 2, Chapter 19. And this was in addition to the Romans that they had already shockingly slaughtered at Masada, 60 miles from Jerusalem, and the Antonia fortress in Jerusalem. So they knew it was a matter of time before the Romans returned and carried out a full-scale retaliation. They needed to prepare, and they put the war effort into the hands of 10 generals. Now, Daniel 7 does talk about 3 horns being plucked up. John does not mention that. In my written notes, I'll speculate on who those 3 horns were. Out of the list of 10 generals, 3 of them were indeed killed by the Zealots in February or March of AD 68. So I'll look for feedback from people later on about that, but I won't go through so many of those details right here. And yeah, with that, I'll move on to point 5, which is the question, how did the 2 beasts relate to those who dwell on the earth. An expression that is found repeatedly in Revelation 13. I think this is really key. This is be in 13 verses 8, 11 through 12, and 14 to 15. The beast would be worshipped by all who dwelt on the earth. And this expression, on the earth, as many of us know and have thought through, can also be translated as in the land, that is the land of Israel. And again, if you were able to download the handout that I posted about a half hour before this began, on page 2, there are a couple of helpful illustrations on that point. But as I read these verses that I just mentioned, please notice that the expression, those who dwell on the earth, appears 4 times. Here's verse 8. And all who dwell on the earth, or in the land, will worship the beast, whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. Here's what verses 11 to 12 say of chapter 13. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. He exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and causes the earth, or the land, and those who dwell in it, to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. Verses 14 through 15 say, and he deceives those who dwell on the earth by these signs, which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast, who was wounded by the sword and lived. He was granted to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. I want to take a couple of minutes to give some background on this expression, on the earth or in the land, before explaining why this is so significant when it comes to the identity of the beast and the close partnership between the 2 beasts that we see in Revelation 13. There are 2 Greek words that are typically translated as earth or world in the New Testament. Those words are G, I'm not sure if it's G or G, but the letters spelled G-E. The other one is cosmos. And as the illustration shows on page 2 of the handout, Dr. Jonathan Welton has shown that the word cosmos appears in the book of Revelation only 3 times. But John used that same word, cosmos, 57 times in the Gospel of John and 17 times in 1 John. And Dr. Welton explains that this word refers to the entire globe or the entirety of planet Earth and the heavens. On the other hand, the word G or Gi, however you say it, appears in the book of Revelation 67 times, which is 22 times more often than the word cosmos. And Dr. Welton says that this word, Ge, refers to a localized, inhabited civilization or the land of a particular nation. Now, this pattern was already established in the Old Testament, where a word which is often translated as earth means a specific land rather than the planet. We especially see this in the book of Isaiah. In fact, Thomas Ice, who you may recognize as a well-known dispensationalist futurist teacher, he acknowledged this pattern in a 2008 article which was published at the Pre-Trib Research Center. And he pointed out that the phrase earth dwellers, which is the same as those who dwell on the earth, that this phrase earth dwellers appears about 50 times in the Hebrew Old Testament, and that the overwhelming majority of times it is rightfully translated as land dwellers or inhabitants of the land, since the context references a localized area of land or country like Israel. I would say especially Israel. That's how Isaiah was using it. And probably the clearest example of this word G or Gi in the New Testament being a local rather than global reference is found in Luke's version of the Olivet Discourse, Luke 21:23. In the surrounding verses, there's no doubt for futurists and preterists alike that Jesus was clearly speaking about Judea and Jerusalem. I'll read that verse in a second. But some Bible versions translate this word as earth, which leads people to think it's the planet, while others do translate it as land. Here's the verse, or here's the passage. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation is near. Let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those who are in the midst of her depart, and let not those who are in the country enter her. For these are the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. For there will be great distress in the land and wrath upon this people. Okay, again, some translations say on the earth, others say in the land. I'll come back around to my biblical scholar Alfred Edersheim, titled Sketches of Jewish Public Life. And Alfred wrote about the significance of the phrase the land to the Jewish rabbis of the first century. And he said Palestine was to the rabbis simply the land, with all other countries being summed up under the designation of outside the land. That's on page 14 of his book. And if you do a study on the New Testament passages where this Greek word ge or gi is used, you'll find that one Bible version consistently translates this word as land instead of earth, and that is Robert Young's literal translation. You'll also find it in the interlinear Before Edersheim's book was published, an author by the name of P.S. Desprez made these remarks in his book Apocalypse Fulfilled, page 13. He said, when the phrase on the earth appears in the book of Revelation, in connection with the governing clauses, they that dwell, then this phrase has and can only have one meaning. They refer only to one land and to one people, and this land and this people must be the land and the people of Judea. Okay, so this exact phrase, those who dwell on the land, is actually found in 10 verses in the book of Revelation. And three of the verses are in this chapter, Revelation 13. And here's where we come back to why this is so important when looking at Revelation 13 in the close relationship between the two beasts. These three references in Revelation 13 are in verses 8, twice in verse 12, and once in verse 14. And as we see, Revelation 13 speaks of two beasts, one that rises up out of the sea and one that rises up out of the earth or land. But what we see is that both of these beasts demand worship and loyalty from who? From those who dwell in the land. The focus is not on the other far-flung parts of the Roman Empire or the city of Rome, but the land of Israel. That's where the beast and the false prophet are demanding worship from those people. And we see that one beast acted as an enforcer for the other. Those who would not worship the first beast, the main beast, were massacred by the beast from the land. So it's significant that all of this activity is in Revelation 13 is centralized in Israel. According to verse 3, all the land followed the beast. According to verse 4, they also worshiped the beast and said, who is able to make war with him? All right, first of all, let's think logically. If this was about the land of, it's definitely about the land of Israel. During the Jewish-Roman War, would the people have collectively said, who is like the beast? Who is like Rome? Who is like Nero? And would they have worshipped him? Boy, if you read the book of Josephus, if you read the works of Josephus and see how he described the climate in the land of Israel at that time, there's no way that happened. There was such an anti-Roman climate. In fact, the Zealots were killing anybody who was the least bit pro-Roman. So were they worshiping the beast openly in Israel? That's really impossible to believe. But going back to verse 4, when they said who was able to make war with him, I believe this was the response after the Zealots kicked the Romans out of Masada and Jerusalem, as we already discussed. That happened in fall or late summer or fall of AD 66. and also when they achieved that shocking victory, as we also discussed, over Cestius Gallus and his army in November of AD 66. Josephus writes about how the zealots hyped up the people and made them think that because of this, Israel was going to win the revolt and actually gain independence like they had during the time of the Maccabees, a couple of centuries earlier. So according to verses 11 through 14 then, I'm sorry, in verses 11 through 17 first, the second beast is mentioned and talked about, but was later called the false prophet, according to Revelation 16:13, Revelation 19:20, and Revelation 20:10. Let me look at something here. See, I got a note from you, Jordan. Oh, okay, got it. According to verses 11 through 14 of Revelation 13, the beast exercised authority in the presence of the first beast. The second beast, that is, exercised authority in the presence of the first beast, causing the people in the land of Israel to worship him, to make an image, etc. Now, a number of preterist authors, as we've said, have identified the first beast as Rome and or Nero, and the second beast, a number of preterist authors have said, were the religious leaders of Israel. So, in other words, the implication would be that the religious leaders in Israel forced the people of Israel to give their loyalty and worship to Rome and to Nero. We really have to think about that in light of everything that we read in the works of Josephus and the other historians. This is really an impossible scenario to imagine with such an extreme anti-Roman climate. Anti-Roman feelings were already strong in Israel before the war, but once the war began, they were literally the only feelings you were allowed to have and to express. Josephus repeatedly told stories about how the zealots killed anyone who they even merely suspected of wanting peace with Rome. So Jerusalem was under the control of the zealots and already off limits to the Romans by that time. Are we still good, Jordan? My screen's doing funny things. I just want to make sure we're still live. Okay, well, I hope we are. I would like to suggest a partnership between the zealots, the first beast, and the false prophets in the land, the second beast.
Hey, hold on a second. Let's make sure we're good technically. Are you able to hear me, Adam?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, you're breaking up a little bit.
All right.
Let's see here. Can you maybe turn down your volume just a little bit?
Sure.
You have such an anointed, booming voice.
Oh,
Technology can't contain the potency of truth. All right, try again.
Okay, how does this sound?
It's still a little bit. Scoot back a little bit.
Yeah.
Don't hit the wall. Okay, say something again. Nothing. Okay.
Better?
Yeah, it's kind of going in and out, but so we'll just go and continue. So go ahead,
right,
man. Should be good.
The good thing is my notes will flow very well. My written
Awesome.
notes will flow very well. Okay, so the point I was getting to was that I want to submit that Revelation 13 describes a partnership between Israel and the Zealots, the first beast, and the false prophets in the land, the second beast. In other words, that the false prophet, which was the other name for the beast from the land, was collectively the false prophets that Josephus wrote about. I want to point out a few examples from the works of Josephus about what this partnership looked like. In his work called Antiquities, chapter 20, book 20, chapter 8.6, Josephus wrote this about the numerous false prophets, excuse me, that were deceiving the Jews during an earlier time of the procurators Felix and Festus, that is from 52 to 62 AD. I'm just setting the scene here. He said that various works that were done by the robbers filled the city with all sorts of impiety. These impostors and deceivers, that's what he called the false prophets, they persuaded the multitude to follow them into the wilderness and pretended that they would exhibit manifest wonders and signs that should be performed by the providence of God. Okay, that's just setting up these false prophets. Now, in Wars of the Jews, book 2, chapter 13, sections 4 to 6, he gets into how these false prophets and deceivers actually worked to stir up the people for revolt and kill those who would not join the revolt. Here's what he said. There was another body of wicked men gotten together. These were such men as deceived and deluded the people under pretense of divine inspiration, but were for procuring innovations and changes of the government. The multitude to act and persuaded the king that I'm being told I'm not heard right now. Now? I'm talking, but you can't hear me? No? Okay. Paul Saul says that he can hear me now. Can you hear me, Jordan? I guess not. All right, well, I'm going to keep talking then, because it sounds like Jordan is the only one who can't hear me. All right. Okay, so I won't read any more of that quote I was just reading, but it's in Wars 2.13.4-6 about how these false prophets slew the men who would not join in the revolt. And Josephus said they did this until all Judea was filled with the effects of their madness, and the flame was every day more and more blown up till it came to a direct war. Now this one's very important. In Wars of the Jews 6.5.1 through 2, Josephus talked about when the temple was burned down, how the number of people who were killed in that blaze was especially high because so many people listened to the words of a false prophet. Okay, good. Josephus also revealed that this false prophet was one of many false prophets who had been hired by the zealots to control the people and keep them from fleeing from their control. And here is that quote. A false prophet was the occasion of these people's destruction, who had made a public proclamation in the city that very day that God commanded them to get upon the temple, and that they should receive miraculous signs of their deliverance. Now there was then a great number of false prophets suborned, which means hired, for deliverance from God, and this was in order to keep them from deserting or leaving. Okay, so that's a little bit about what this partnership looked like, I believe, that I want to submit to us here. Some may ask, what about Nero's persecution? Revelation 13:5-7 does say that the beast would have authority for 40 months, that is 3.5 years, and that the beast would make war with the saints and overcome them. And this is parallel to Daniel 7, I believe, verse 25, which says the same thing, same period of time and everything. Well, didn't Nero persecute Christians for 3.5 years, beginning in AD 64? That's what I had heard, and that's what I passed on as well, without looking very critically at it. Let's quickly look at what some historians say about why Nero persecuted Christians, where his persecution took place, and for how long it took place. Well, the Roman historian Tacitus most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace of Rome. Accordingly, an arrest most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. I'm told that my audio is gone again for somebody. I hope that's not true for everybody. An arrest was first made of all who pleaded guilty, then upon their information an immense multitude was convicted, not so much of the crime of firing the city, but as of hatred against mankind. Okay, good. So Tacitus said that Christians in Rome were persecuted for hatred against mankind and as scapegoats for arson. This was an entirely different cause for persecution than what John saw taking place in Revelation 13, verse 15. There, John saw that persecution and death came for refusing to worship the beast. The Encyclopedia of Biblical, Theological, and Ecclesiastical Literature, Volume 6, long title, says that Nero's persecution of Christians does not seem to have extended through all the provinces of the Roman Empire, but rather to have been restricted to Rome and the surrounding country. That's on page 956. On the other hand, John saw persecution happening to those who were dwelling in the land of Israel, carried out by the second beast, that is the false prophet, that came up out of the land, and taking place in the presence of the first beast, that is where the first beast was located. Verses 11 through 14. Again, it's quite impossible to imagine the false prophets from the land demanding that the people of Israel worship Nero with the penalty of death for those who refused, when those same people came under the tight control of the fanatically anti-Roman zealots in AD 66, less than 2 years after Nero's persecution began. Now, regarding the length of time that Nero persecuted Christians, another resource called A Critical Study of the Sources of the History of the Emperor Nero, which is written by John Nicholas Henry John, notes that Nero's persecution may not have lasted even 2 years. And this is because in late 866, Nero left Rome and went to Greece, where he remained for more than a year. And this author also agrees that Nero likely did not order the persecution to be extended to the provinces, that is, outside of the city of Rome. So various sources seem to show that Nero's persecution, which was severe, however, did not match the motive, location, or duration of time spoken of in Revelation 13, 5 through 8, and also Daniel 7. And Daniel 7, by the way, really seems to show that this persecution went all the way up until the very time that the kingdom would be stripped from the beast, given into the hands of the saints. If you look at that carefully, it really looks like there was not a 2, 3, or 4 year gap after the persecution before the crushing of the beast, as would be the case if this was Nero's persecution starting in AD 64. Rather, it looks like it went all the way up until the beast was captured and cast into the lake of fire. Okay, almost done here. So Revelation 24 also speaks of those who had been beheaded for refusing to worship the beast and receive his mark. And quite a number of times, just to conclude, so the audio is gone again. I'll pause for a second. Sometimes it comes back. In the preterist movement, it seems that when it comes to the man of lawlessness of 2 Thessalonians 2, there's been a shift. It used to be taken for granted that the man of sin was Nero, but now, if we look online at these discussions, it seems like a number of writers have concluded that instead of the man of sin being Nero or a Roman figure, it was actually a Jew, one of the zealots. I would like to suggest that we should at least consider whether this same shift is justified when it comes to the beast. In other words, I'm hoping that a more critical analysis will be applied to the question of the beast, as some have applied to the man of sin. Okay, just as I close here, what are a couple of things that we can take away from this subject of the beast? Whether you agree that the beast was Israel and the zealots or not, just looking at what the zealots did, we see that their agenda was war. We see that they persecuted those who threatened that agenda or would not go along with it. We see that the zealots stood in complete opposition to the message of Jesus and the message of the new covenant and the message of the kingdom of God. The zealots in Israel was determined to maintain, build, and spread their own kingdom. They were extreme nationalists, but ironically, they destroyed their own nation and kingdom and region fighting for this ideal. The very first time we held one of these calls, I gave a message on the vision of the Old Testament prophets for the New Covenant, how it was one about peace. And that was true of the first century, and it's true now in the year 2017. So are there beasts, even now, who are trying to get us to follow some type of war agenda like the Zealots had? What about the Christian Zionist movement that openly calls for war with Iran and other perceived enemies of Israel? What about voices outside of Christianity and unfortunately inside of the Christian church as well that want us to fight against refugees or Muslims or liberals or other groups, anybody that we happen to label as an enemy for whatever reason? I'll close with a quote from N.T. Wright in his book, Mark for Everyone, page 152. He said, the word brigand in Jesus' day wasn't a word for thief or robber in the ordinary sense, but for the revolutionaries, those we today would call the ultra-Orthodox, plotting and ready to use violence to bring about their nationalistic dreams. Part of Jesus' charge against his fellow Jews was that Israel as a whole had used its vocation to be a light for the world as an excuse for a hard, narrow, nationalist piety and politics in which the rest of the world was not to be enlightened, but instead condemned. So let's be careful that we do not go down the same type of path. Let's make sure that we are the peacemakers that Jesus has called us to be. And that's what I have. Thank you. That's Arkansas. Thanks, y'all. Jordan's in Arkansas. Oh man, I can't hear Jordan. Thanks everyone for tuning in. I can't hear any of you. I can't hear Jordan, but I'm glad to see the feedback. Thanks for everybody who pointed out when sound was bad. And I hope you captured most of it. Everybody who pointed out when sound was bad. I hope you captured most of it. Everybody who pointed out when sound was bad. I hope you captured most of it. Everybody who pointed out when sound was bad.
Can people hear me? Oh my gosh, so I've got audio, but I can hear myself on the cell phone.
I can hear you now.
I thought I didn't.
As I could not before. I don't know what just happened.
I didn't have like any microphone this whole time. Oh my gosh. Okay, everybody.
Thank you,
sorry about this. Apparently my headphones need updated. They're like a $10 pair that we got, I think, on sale, and it's showing that they were on sale. Next time I need to invest in some better headphones, I think. But Adam, thank you so much for taking this time tonight. I'm thankful that the audio issues didn't happen until the latter part of the message. I got tons of nuggets to go pursue because of this message. I will never see the beast the same. You raised some very, very valid conclusions that I think we're all going to have to highly consider now. So thank you for your study, thank you for your knowledge, and thank you for your time, Adam, in taking time tonight. And also all of you guys, Aaron Page, Paul, Sauls, Elizabeth, Jimmy Schools, my man. Curtis Arts. I saw JD King stopped in for a little bit. James Peterson, all you guys, thank you so much for being a part of this. And we're just trying to get the message of fulfilled prophecy to the world because we believe it brings hope towards the future. And we believe it brings optimism towards the future. And we believe that it brings a revelation of the kingdom, the present kingdom that we believe is present and is transforming the world. So thank you for being a part of this mission. Adam and I thank you dearly. And we love you guys. And I can't hear you, but I think you can hear me. So hope you guys have a really great night. And we look forward to next month's call. Not sure who's going to be speaking, but going to make sure it's somebody awesome. So adios.
Take care, everyone. God bless you.
Adam, I see your lips moving, so I think you said something, but I don't read
man,
lips.
you can't hear me?
Did you say that I'm ugly? I mean, that's true, but you don't have to say it on live television.
Yeah. Forgive me. I take it back.
What? Did you just say I look like Jimmy Neutron? That's also true, but you don't... All right, guys.
I'm just losing control. I can't control my tongue right now.
I'll end this madness. All right, guys. Have a good night. We'll see you.